Welcome to AEC Stories, the USS Mount Hood podcast. I'm former SM3 Dempsey, and today I've got a very special guest. He wasn't on my ship, but he was part of the big picture. This is Colonel Paul Adams, USMC retired, and he was pretty much in charge for the security of the base where my ship parked, and there's reasons why we needed such security. So welcome aboard, Paul. How are things going for you today?
Doing great, Len, and I appreciate you reaching out to me to participate in this podcast. It's great to be able to get these sea stories and now land stories on file for all time, and so others can know what you and I both did in service to our great nation.
For sure. Now, you were a Marine, and I don't know, did you ever serve on a ship at any point in your career? Because sometimes you guys do, or sometimes you ride in the Gator Freighter Navy, the LSTs or the LPDs.
Sure. Well, actually, I started off on the Navy side. I was a midshipman through the Naval Reserve Officer Training Corps program at the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. I grew up in the Pasadena area, in Pasadena. Mm-hmm. And in the course of my training as a midshipman, I was on a DDG, the Robeson, a DDG-12 out of San Diego. I did a cruise to Norway on the USS Iwo Jima.
Cool.
And I also was on a couple of submarines, the Simon Bolivar. I did a short overnighter on that one. And let's see, there were, several ships off and on for various exercises. So while I was not a part of a ship's company or ship's detachment, I was able to enjoy the sea life, particularly that Iwo Jima cruise. We actually went from Morehead City, North Carolina, when I was stationed with the 2nd Marine Division at Camp Lejeune, all the way up to Norway.
Oh, wow. And was it wintertime or summertime?
It was winter, yes. These were Arctic ops. And and we actually crossed over the Arctic Circle. And
blue noses.
Yep, I'm a blue nose. I went through that great ritual being sprayed with ultra cold seawater. But yeah, it was great.
That was part of our time. They don't really do it as heartily as they used to, I guess, even becoming a shellback for that matter when you cross the equator. But I don't know, how did you, Norway, did you see the Northern Lights? Because every time I went north, I would see them. I mean, you were up north enough to see that when you're out at sea, like the red lights in the sky or Aurora Borealis.
We really didn't. As we got further north, it got colder, and the interior of the ship was our friend at that point until we went ashore. And we were moving around quite a bit in the mountains of Norway there. So unfortunately, I didn't get to see very, very much or any of that.
Not much topside. No, I had to. We were going way up north, and towards the North Pole, and passing the Aleutian Islands. And I remember it was past lights out. Usually, how they lights out, and then we dim everything and put on our red lights in the ship, so we had better night vision, and the running lights were on, and every major surface light was kind of dimmed down. And it was probably like 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock. And the captain was just so enthusiastic. We're cruising out at sea. It's a pitch black night. And he's like, ladies and gentlemen, starboard side, Aurora Borealis, Aurora Borealis. He just kept screaming it. He woke up the whole ship.
That's like fun. Yeah.
That was the only time he ever made an announcement like that. He got excited about that. It just looked like a big red lamp. It was just a big lamp, and you were, wait, who's turning that lamp on? Like, there was nothing suspending it. It was pretty interesting. So, how did you end up deciding to go with the Marines over any other service, or did you have any other in your sight before you joined?
When I was in junior high school, I had to write a short paper on what I thought I wanted to do or be in life. And initially it was to be a pilot of the B-52 bomber. I had read a National Geographic article on that aircraft, and I just thought I was just the coolest thing on the planet. But then as I read further into air warfare, planes get shot down. And so I figured, well, I'd rather be closer to the earth than, 2 miles up and have to exit the aircraft. So my next desire was to be the captain of a nuclear aircraft carrier. So that kind of got me over to the Navy side. I had to do a science project, and my report was on the steam catapult system on the Navy aircraft carriers.
So they launched the planes with, right?
Right, exactly. Yep. They have from 0 to 120 knots in seconds. So that got me interested in the Navy, applied and got a Naval ROTC scholarship. But then as the things worked out, when I got to Southern Cal for summer indoctrination, I saw the Marine officer instructor and the Marine senior enlisted, and all they would do was just cross their arms and scowl and look at people. And they had their khaki shirts on and their dress blues with the red stripes, and they just looked super hardcore. And over the course of the 2.5-week indoctrination, I thought, I think I'd like to do that. I'd like to cross my arms and scowl at people too. So it turned out that myself and one other Navy option, we were number 1 and 2 for the indoctrination period. We both decided to go Marine option. And that just threw the Navy captain, who was the commander, and the commander USN, who was the executive officer of the NROTC unit, in a tizzy, because number 1 and 2 guys wanted to go Marine option. So that's kind of how that worked out.
Wow.
I had an air guarantee, so I was on track to fly.
Wow.
And so that's a whole other part of the story that we might get into, but that's kind of what led me into the military.
That's so interesting. The old arm crossing trick. That's their marketing tactic.
Yeah.
Let's get that Clint Eastwood scowl going on over there. Cross
Scowl
our arms
and cross your arms, have your legs spread at just the right width, Yeah, it sold me.
What was any of your family in the military before you joined?
My father was a World War II vet. Just by way of information, I'm African American, and he served in the Army. He was a draftee. He was in the Quartermaster Corps and was a truck driver and mechanic on the Burma Highway.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, he was over there in it, all those switchback roads and all of that for his time in the war. So if I remember right from his DD-214, he was in for a good 3.5-year period.
Wow.
Of war. And then he got out in San Pedro, California. And that's what got him to California from central Georgia. And obviously that's what got me to California. So.
Yeah, I just watched a lot of movies about California. Like I wrote you last night how I was a military brat. And I would go to the States every couple of years for a couple months, and I would miss everything American, because when you live in Italy, you don't know how good you have it. And you're like, oh, I want to see the new G.I. Joe, you're a kid, or I want to see the new, I want to try McDonald's new burger, because they didn't have that over there. But, I didn't realize the quality of the food we already had, right?
Yes.
But I wanted the new action. And then the more movies I watched, because we didn't have American TV there, we would copy VHS tapes. Like one of my friends' dads had 4 VHS recorders all wired together, trying to get, someone would just press record in the States on HBO and get whatever you got is, the Russian roulette of movies,
Right.
You're like, oh, well, I didn't know if I'd like that movie, but it's in American. I'll watch them all,
Yeah, exactly.
So, it's not even the language, but I said that it's in American. And I watched movies like Fast Times at Ridgemont High and Valley Girl, and I'm like, wow, the girls are pretty in that movie.
Yes.
Oh, okay. And the surfing life looks cool. And then, and then all the skateboarding influence that came out of like the Long Beach area, the downtown Z-Boys,
right.
The skateboarder culture and surfing culture went around the world, and they really, I think California had a hold on what is cool.
Oh, exactly. The whole the convertibles and the surfboard out the back and the VW bus with surfboards and Malibu and all of that. Yeah.
I mean, and I was like, I can't wait to get to California, so I don't know. The Marines, I think I didn't join was to defy my dad. Like, I'm going to be different than you. And the Army, I had grown up in it. And I was like, I'm tired of this. Mm-hmm. I want to do something new. So the Navy recruiter was extremely, persuasive. I mean, I walk in, he's got these two pretty girls talking to him. I'm a young, single, influential, easy to be influenced young mind. And he's like, this is how it is for all of us out there. We do this in the Navy. I'm playing on that a bit, but I'm signing up, buddy. And, I went to A school for signalmen, and there was a guy in front of me who, I had too much fun in A school. So I was just one billet away from getting to pick the last Californian. And I looked at the guy and I said, hey, bud, $50 cash. You take Philadelphia. What do you say?
And the rest is history.
And then I end up in California, stationed at a Concord Naval Weapons Station, where you are in charge of the security, doing a serious job. And you guys were like ninjas or snipers. Like, nobody could really see you unless you did something bad and you guys popped up out of the ground or something. I mean, what was it like being in charge of the security for Naval Weapons Station?
Well, let me step back a little bit to just kind of give you a prelude. I was stationed at Camp Lejeune. Mm-hmm. I just pinned on major and was looking for my next assignment. This was in the spring of '89, and got a hold of the monitor, trying to find something not quite so deployable, I guess is the word, because I had small kids at the time.
You had a family going at the time, yeah.
Right, exactly. And so the monitor who assigns people offered me this slot at a place called Naval Weapons Station, Concord. And the billet was commanding officer of the Marine Corps Security Company. And so I paused and I said, okay, well, you realize I'm a motor transport officer. Yeah. They said, yeah, I realize that, but we have to spread these billets out and you're qualified. And do you want the job? So I said, well, give me 24 hours. Let me go home and talk to the family about it. And we thought, hey, why not? It's back in California, which is where we were all from. And it looked like a decent assignment. So signed up for it, and we left. We got everybody packed up in the van and the truck and headed west. We're heading west. So that is that's what started us going. So we get out to California, and we're driving this Oldsmobile diesel station wagon. And this car was, I think it was like a 81 or 82. And if anybody remembers diesels from back in that period, they were basically
smokehouses,
and there were gasoline engines that they had just kind of tweaked to make them a diesel, and they weren't very reliable. So at any rate, we ended up blowing the head gaskets in New Mexico. Had to buy a new car in New Mexico. Finally got to Contra Costa County, and realized.
Sorry not to interrupt you. That kind of sounded like the family vacation movie.
Yeah, it was.
You had the family truckster.
It was wild. Yeah, exactly. I mean, who has to buy a car in New Mexico because you blew it up, your other car up in New Mexico?
Only the Griswolds.
Yes, exactly.
So going to Contra Costa, I'm sorry, but that just came to mind.
So then as we get to California, we realize that, in fact, we can't register this car because it's not a California car. And the smog rules were extremely stringent. I had to get a waiver because I was military and in transit. Fortunately, that qualified for the waiver. Anyway, we're going down Port Chicago Highway. And at the time, this is in '89, there was nothing there other than the golf course. Once you got beyond the golf course, I turned to my wife and I said, I think we're at the end of the road. I don't see anything ahead of us. And then it opened up, and here's this gate for Naval Weapons Station Concord. So, we get a house on A Street there, which was the officer row housing just as you come in the main gate. And I began my assignment as the commanding officer of Marine Corps Security Company Concord. My change of command was in the Quebec area, which was adjacent to the piers, which is where your ship berthed. And I had to learn very quickly what the job was all about. But to cut to the Reader's Digest version, we guarded a high security area and deadly force was authorized. Every Marine had a Condition 1 weapon, which means a full magazine, round in the chamber. And if you didn't do what we told you to do, you could die that day.
Yeah. You guys are definitely wired for sound. I recall, like I said to one of my other friends, like, how did you know about those Marines? Well, I went to the wrong side of the gate once. And wow, were they quick, and boy, were they efficient. And I got to say, hey, hats off to you. And that's like when I started looking on YouTube, and that's how I found your video. I'm like, I got to talk to him, because I realize now that I'm older what that entailed and how the level of security goes up based on what you're guarding and so forth.
Yes.
And go ahead.
Well, it's interesting that you found me through that video, because just a short segue, that video was the product of a requirement that I put on myself to create a briefing video. My higher headquarters was at the Mare Island Naval Shipyard. That's where Marine Corps Security Force Battalion Pacific was. And Marine Corps Security Force Company Concord was the closest active, really doing something security force company. So we'd get a lot of VIPs and, folks coming down to see what we were doing and blah, blah, blah. And so having a briefing video just kind of cut through trying to tell people what we did without really showing them what we did.
Right, right.
So I was able to get from Captain Cagle at the time, the station commander, some money to have that produced. And over the course of about 3 weeks, that video was produced, and it's out there in the YouTube sphere, and so that's how you found me. That's great.
I love it. I was looking at it. I'm like, you guys were so stealthy and so professional that I remember reading a book. I don't know if you ever read any of the Rogue Warrior series by Dick Marcinko, the former Navy SEAL, who talks about, there was one book he wrote about a thing he called red cell, where they do red cell tests.
Sure.
Is that term equal in your same language in Marines? Like when you test the bases and stuff?
It's close. Yes. Yes.
Okay. So yeah, I don't think anybody was sneaking up anywhere on anything on that base. There was no way in hell. And I looked at how you guys must have been thinking, your situational awareness, the level of professionalism, and just like the hardcoreness of that job, because, it didn't look like a lot of things were moving, but to be ready for the just in case factors, which could be monstrous, you guys had to be really turned on there. Yes,
you're exactly right, Len. And, just to kind of give you a sketch of the average Marine who served at Concord, you had a Marine who went through recruit training, who went through the School of Infantry. They were selected for security force duty because you had to have a secret clearance. And then they went up to Marine Corps Security Force Battalion Pacific at Mare Island for almost a month of training. You had weapons training, you had squad tactics, you had observation and surveillance. Some of the Marines were trained in driving armored vehicles. So once all that was done, then they would be assigned to a security force company anywhere from Diego Garcia, Adak, Alaska, Bangor, Washington, Concord, Alameda Naval Air Station, and North Island. And I'm probably missing one or two, but those were the main ones for the Pacific region. And so their mindset was, okay, we're going somewhere. We're guarding something that we cannot let get away from us. It must be over our dead body. And the fact that they always had weapons with rounds in the chamber and were authorized to fire those under certain conditions, that really got you in the groove very quickly.
What a change. Was that a big change from your command before where you're at as a major?
Well, this was my first command as a major. I mean,
okay. I'm sorry. Before you were a major,
I had command as a captain, but that was as a part of a larger unit, a landing support battalion for those in the Gator Navy who might know the Shore Party Marines.
Mm-hmm.
So, that was way back, but this was really independent duty. When you think of Naval Weapons Station Concord, you can think of it in terms of a ship with, certain assets aboard. And you qualify to have Marines as a part of your ship's detachment. And that's what we were on Concord. We were a part of the high security detachment for Naval Weapons Station Concord.
Well, I remember, and there's a good photograph of you guys guarding a ship like mine. It wasn't my ship specifically. It was another one of the AE class, the auxiliary ammo ships, Volcano Navy. And when we were doing loading up the train cars before we set out to Desert Storm, you guys set some major league security going on over there. I remember.
Yeah, you're exactly right. That was a very interesting time. It was more or less day on, stay on. And we had Marines who were in the Quebec area on their shift. We had Marines who were a part of the reaction force who would be called upon to reinforce Marines in the Q area should an assault occur. And then you had what was supposed to be the off-duty section who was, having some off-duty time and training.
Mm-hmm.
That was gone because, as you articulated, we were providing security on the piers to help with the loadout for ammunition for Desert Storm. Exactly.
And when I was on that rotation too on the ship, it was similar. I mean, we had port and starboard, but we had 12 on, 12 off. 12 on, you couldn't get, the ship couldn't leave until the last man came back off of Liberty. So if you were UA, AWOL, wandering around,
right, it just screwed everybody else.
There was 180 mad people waiting for you.
Exactly.
I'm not going to say if I did that once, but I'm not going to say that I was in back of an RX-7 sleeping upside down with my face pressed against the window.
Oh my goodness.
Oh yeah. I mean, but I spent half my time in the military as a young punk, and then the next 3 years as a super squared away guy. And I'm more remembered for the squared away guy, but you get there as a kid and you think, oh, it's going to be cool. And then it gets real, war and, life. You get married, you grow up, you change,
right.
Get away from your wild buddies. Everybody either grows up or falls off. And, it was an event, but what was it like living out there for you? I mean, what was, was it just very intense taking care of such a big asset, such a serious thing?
As a commander, my whole philosophy was to know what my troops were doing. And so I actually, over the period of about 3-4 months, I stood every post that all the Marines stood out there. And because I wanted to understand what they were doing, how they were doing it, and what I could do to increase the efficiency of the operations and to reduce any fluff, anything that wasn't exactly pertinent to the accomplishment of the mission. So when you're walking post with a 12-gauge shotgun, because I carry, but the Marines would carry the M16A2 service rifle. They had about 120 rounds in magazines. Some of them had the M203 40-millimeter grenade launcher underneath. And so we would be walking all around. We would stop. We would get behind areas. We'd be looking up just in case somebody would parachute in. We were attuned to the weather. Is this going to be an overcast night? It's going to be a moonlit night. As you recall, there are hills that kind of bisect the base there. On the one side is the main installation, and then the other side was the in the tidal area. So we had to be aware of what was going on those hills also. We had a clear zone of about 75, almost 100 yards all around the Quebec magazine area. And we would go out and patrol that also at various intervals just to see if anybody was walking around out there or anything was going on. So it was constant awareness that you had a real mission because you had real bullets in a real weapon and you were authorized to shoot to kill.
That's that's the interesting thing. You bring that up, the high level situational awareness. And, before we started the podcast, I was just talking to a young sailor on a destroyer because of those two shipwrecks. And my job was to kind of mirror what you're doing and be that guy to not let anybody come up on your six or anything. And we talked. And he's like, I agree with you, old man, basically. And that's not, I don't think that there's too much that we can say to this new generation because they're they're growing up with electronics and AI and all these other new things.
Right. Yes.
And it's like, okay, if the electricity just blew out one day and some kind of EMP thing happened, you'd have to be able to hunt. You'd have to be able to survive. You'd have to be able to go back to basics, right? And if you grow up as an apartment person, your situational awareness and everything else becomes really wonky. I mean, you're not top game as you could be.
Right. And you bring up the aspect of our devices, our cell phones, our tablets, always being connected. Well, correct. Back in 89 to 92, when I had command there, I was the only one in the unit that had a cell phone.
Did you have the brick?
Oh yeah. Well, I had the Geiger counter. I had, even before the brick, I had a Geiger counter. And so when the Marines went in the wire and when the Marines went on a response force duty, they were totally cut off from the outside world. And all we had was radios, and we had our regular 15-minute check-ins. And the protocol was check-ins don't occur on time, or, if we see smoke from over the hill or we hear rounds popping off, we're sending everybody to reinforce that area. So, even that aspect was totally unheard of, and it'd be tough to really convince people today about how it was back then.
Yeah, it's really interesting. You probably have, I don't know, did you guys have cameras and stuff like today's military does, or no? Was it all based on quadrants and check-ins and
right? It was all based on the human, on the armed Marine.
Yeah.
Walking post, making your call in on a handheld radio. And if that call in didn't happen, you might wait one more minute, but after that, you've got Marines rolling.
Yeah. That's, the Navy, we did not get as much combat training per se as you guys did, for sure. I think your boot camp was a lot more physically demanding. I mean, unless you go Navy SEALs, then you're getting more comparable to the Navy Recon. But I mean, as far as that, you guys were more trained to do battle in the field and to do really like SWAT-like security and above. And, I know what it is. It's like when I was younger, screw those guys, the divide and conquer pride of different branches, sure. Right?
Yeah. We all have it. Yeah.
But now as an older man, I'm like, hey, respect to all of you, So I was there the whole time you were there. I was there from actually 88, and I got out of the Navy in 93.
Wow.
But my ship would bounce. I was in for 6 years. I joined in 87. So, I got in a motorcycle wreck my last year in the Navy, 92. So I spent my whole year in Oaknall. But I knew Concord was there. So in 92, you basically took off. Where did you go from Concord?
So after my tour at Concord, I went to the Marine Corps Command and Staff College in Quantico, Virginia. And after that, I went on to Okinawa, Japan. And I was a part of the 3rd Force Service Support Group out there. But to kind of cycle back around to what life was like on Concord.
Sure.
It was something out of, the 60s. It was sort of like Mayberry RFD, I'll call it. In the
it was. Yeah, it really was. I can feel that vibe exactly.
Right. Right. I mean, A Street and the officer housing there as you first come in the main gate, it was something right out of that era. kids could come and go. You had no worry about them. There were cows on the hills. There was the golf course there along Kinney Boulevard. Kids would go and gather golf balls and sell them back to the golfers. And, we had the little Navy Exchange there, in the old Marine barracks building. And so, you could really just be a kid there. And you didn't have to think about your kids. I got to tell you a little segue story. You say you didn't have to think about your kids. Sometimes you did, because my son, he would have been going on 5 years old, and he got hooked up with some guys there who were maybe a little older than him. And one of the things that they ended up doing was redistributing mail from people's mailboxes.
How fun.
On A Street. Yeah. Yeah. All of a sudden, you had people who were getting other people's mail, and some of them weren't getting mail. And, we had to run that down, and found out that these three young boys, one of which was my son, was involved in mail redistribution. I guess that they were trying to get on the civil service exam early or something for the mail department. But, it was just
studying.
Studying mail handling early. But
it's I understand that, being a military brat, growing up in Germany, running around with BB guns at 3 years old and breaking into the baseball field that the soldiers played on. And we were 3. We're pouring shampoo in our hair in a hot sun and throwing red sand in it. And my mom's like, "Where's my son?" I probably wandered a mile away. Yeah.
Right.
That's the kind of stuff that happens when you get a kid on base.
Right. And in the main, you're really not worried about it, because that they are going to come home. And, if you really had to go look for them, there's only a few places that they would normally be anyway. So, yeah, it was a great life. It was really nice.
It's what a change. So you're in Minnesota now. Do you ever miss the California weather, or are you happier where you're at now?
I'm happy where I'm at now. I'm actually just over the border in Wisconsin. So I kind of have to claim my Wisconsin roots, but I do work for St. Paul Public Schools in St. Paul, Minnesota. I've been up here now going on 11 years. So I think I have my plank. So, I got my membership card and my piece of plank. Every winter's different, but the spring, summer, fall are to die for up here. So, yeah, this is home.
That's pretty cool. I mean, we all come from different places. A lot of my shipmates were from other states, Detroit, New York, Pennsylvania. They all live here still after being on the Mount Hood. They just claim the Bay Area, and it's gotten so ridiculously expensive. I still live here. I'm not rich. I'm just hanging on. It's like this place, from what it cost back then and how affordable it was back when you were here and back when I was here. It was, you could grow up, be a kid. Even if you were not a good kid and you dropped out of high school at 16, you could go get a job doing bondo at a, body shop for cars and afford your own apartment. Now, your kids aren't leaving your house till they're about 36 and finish their master's or PhD, because in order to afford your own apartment, you need to make at least $100,000.
Right. Yeah. The cost of living is crazy.
It's insane. And it's very, I'm going to be doing some more footage and films, and Tuesday I'm going to talk to the USS Hornet, museum crew, the PR guy, about helping them launch a podcast. And I would hope to one day, this is my big fantasy, to have the Bay Area military reunion on that carrier.
Wow.
Just some huge, crazy event. I know that sounds ambitious, but, I think as the podcast grows and the audience grows and people are looked up and accounted for, and, the vibe builds, I think it could be a decent turnout at least.
Well, and I think you're right. We, as in the Marines of Concord, we just completed our first reunion.
Oh, nice.
Yeah. 3rd week of June of this year. It was a tour project, and we got about 77, 79 Marines and spouses and significant others. And we started on a Friday. We had a mixer. Saturday, we boarded some school buses and took a trip back on memory lane. We went back into the Quebec area, which is now a decommissioned magazine area. The Marines got to see their old posts. They got to go into the response force facility, just walk the old grounds. Brought back a lot of memories, a lot of camaraderie came back from walking that concrete. And then we had a banquet Saturday night, a full program. That video that you saw, the Marines of Concord. I had some other videos. We had a lot of pictures that we were had on a running slideshow. We also commissioned a beer stein. And the Marines got their beer stein, and it was just a great affair for those who were able to attend and to just bring back those days. And so when you talk about the military members still in the Bay Area, there's still a fair amount of Marines from Concord who either got out, that was their final tour in the Marine Corps, or they came back, or they married someone who was there in Concord. In fact, the guy who helped me with the project, he lives, literally, I think on Pacheco Highway, just over the hill from Concord. And he got out there in Concord. He married a local girl. He's still living there.
What a trip. It's funny. Like, I probably have a shipmate that lives, a mile from the old ship where it was. Our ship got towed away, put in the mothball fleet, decommissioned, I believe in the late 90s. And I had a call one day, and this is a few years ago. One of my shipmates called me who I hadn't talked to. And I didn't realize how strong that bond and camaraderie was, because for some reason, I'm going to push this behind me and become a very successful civilian. That was my mindset then. It's certainly come around 100%. And that's where, look, obviously I'm doing a podcast about it, but, he says, hey, our ship's going to get towed away to be trashed and turned into razor blades. So I showed up, and there was like 25 other guys that I hadn't seen in 20 years.
Wow.
And, we were hanging out on the pier and drinking beers and toasting the ship. And there were some guys that were supposed to tow it away, some civilian guys, and they're like, hey, you need to get out of here. They kept yelling at us like, hey, we're on the other side of the fence, man. And so they were talking smack, like, we're like, that's our ship. You know what I mean? But we didn't try to mount it or do anything bad. Then the cops showed up, and we just talked to them. We said, hey, that was our ship. You kind of understand, right? They're like, yeah, screw those guys. They let us take pictures like we were getting arrested on their cop car and stuff like that. But, a ship is interesting, as is a base. I don't know. When was the base to go back to Concord? Do you know when it was actually closed down?
I want to say it finally secured around 1999.
Okay.
It was in the process of decommissioning. So the Marines left there in 94, 95. And after the Marines left, the process really started accelerating. I don't know if you've heard of this book called Behind the Barbed Wire.
No, but I'll check it out though for sure.
Yeah, Behind the Barbed Wire, History of Naval Station Concord by John A. Keibel. Kilo Echo India Bravo Echo Lima. He's a part of the Concord Historical Society, and he produced, which I'm holding in my hand, he produced this great book that literally tells you anything you want to know about Concord Naval Weapons Station. But to answer your question, the late 80s is when it finally shut down, and it went into a kind of a reserve status. Seal Beach Naval Weapons Station had control of it for a long, long period of time. And right now, the main inland side, the administrative building, IA-1, the parade grounds, all that whole cantonment area, it's all dead. The buildings are still there, but they're sealed up, in a state of decay, basically. But the tidal area is under the control of the Army. And the Army has a ocean terminal, the Military Ocean Terminal Concord, or otherwise known as MOTCO, MOTCO. So they run the years down there. They have some new magazines that are all on the title side. All the magazines in Magazine City are all decommissioned. And so, just in the main gate there on Kinney, A Street is gone. All those houses have been leveled, and there's an Army administrative cantonment area right there that is the MOTCO headquarters.
Interesting. Now, I was going to ask you, because I was just curious to see if you see it like I do. Well, first I'll tell you what I think. I go to these bases and I feel like I was in a cowboy movie, and all the props and stage was there. It was full of life. It was alive. The production was on. And then I come back to like Naval Air Station or any of these other bases, and they're all sealed and torn down. It's like, whoa, like the life, the energy, and the memories were sucked out of it. How does it affect you when you saw all that stuff? When you went back?
It was kind of surreal, because you can see Marines walking around. You can see sailors coming and going. You see vehicles and civilians coming and going, but then you realize that they're not there. I was old office, and there was a couple of dead squirrels in the corner,
That's very unprofessional. Get those out of here.
Yeah. Who's in charge of this? Somebody's going to captain's mast over this.
That's right. Who put the squirrels in?
Exactly. And they're dead too.
Oh my God.
Some of the Marines were able to get into their barracks, and they, just brought back a flood of memories, cleaning weapons and, swapping lies and, polishing boots and getting ready to go on guard duty. The house I lived in on base, of course, like I mentioned, it was torn down, but you could still see, kind of where it was, and that brought back memories. But you're exactly right. You go back to like your ship or an installation you served on, and, it's like you jump back in time to when you were there.
It pulls it all to the front from like the back of your mind into a lucid, like boom, like you're in it, like a VR, virtual reality.
Yes. And I mean, it was, a part of the reason why we really wanted to get this reunion to happen this year is because the fact that the buildings are deteriorating so rapidly, and the city of Concord, is really coming up with their plan for reutilization of the base and particularly that inland administrative area.
I just see more housing for Google people. I mean, everywhere, what's going on in the Bay Area is they're building these 3-story condos like crazy. They can squeeze more units on a, square lot when they build them like triple high.
Yes.
Just the way they displace it. So they're popping up all along the BART station railways all over the Bay, and they're popping up in places like that. And some builders get the great ambition because, all the high tech is here. But I know this is a side note, but what they might not be anticipating is the future of automation displacing a lot of those jobs.
Right, exactly. Well, and in fact, you're exactly right. And during the time that I had to make a couple of liaison trips there to coordinate our reunion, but there's already autonomous car companies who are using the inland administrative area for autonomous car operations and software hardware validation. So yeah, you're exactly right. It's being used right now in that regard.
Did you ever have to go to NAS, Naval Air Station in Alameda or Treasure Island? Did you ever have any work over there, or did you ever have to use those bases?
I went to so part of what I wanted to do when I first got there, and I'd been there for about 6-8 months, I wanted to get out and see what other Marine Corps Security Force companies were doing, because, I didn't have a real good frame of reference, just being at my own unit. So I was able to go to Naval Air Station North Island down in San Diego. The Naval Air Station Alameda was, of course, just down the freeway, so I frequently went there. I was able to go to Marine Corps Security Force Company Adak, Alaska. So me and Marines from my company, we worked our way out there and went to ADAC and saw the Marines there. I came back with a real great appreciation of what I had at Concord. Because, you talk about at the end of the food chain, ADAC is right there. It's right there. You can see a sign that says, "You are at the end of the food chain here."
Oh, wow.
And then I went up to Bangor, Maine, to the facility up there and saw what they had to deal with, which, as an aside, they actually had an airplane, thought that the long streets of the Magazine Row there that the Marines were guarding was an airport. And they actually had an airplane land in there. They had quite the reception committee, as you can imagine. They were down on the concrete, looking at the granular aspects of that installation. But yeah. So yeah,
oh, wow.
I was fortunate to be able to get out and see almost every unit except Diego Garcia.
Do you think that some of like the fast teams, it's called fast team, right?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so I did my research a little bit.
You did.
Part of what I got to do as a signalman is know all the different ships or armament capabilities, aircraft, and all that. Then I go and just out of own curiosity, I looked into all the different branches, their specialties, special forces, their responsibilities. Got a few friends in that, but it's interesting. The fast team is now what is, I would believe that what you developed on Concord would be the premise of what fast team probably came from, something like what you did. Is there any correlation there?
So when you think about Concord, think of a ship's detachment. And, we had, in fact, ship's detachments were on aircraft carriers primarily to guard a particular area of that ship that had a certain munition aboard. And so that's all that they did. And so, I mean, it was kind of rote guard duty, in all honesty. It was guarding. The fleet anti-terrorism security teams, or the FAST teams, were primarily to go anywhere at a moment's notice and reinforce an installation, such as an embassy who already has Marine security guards, but of course, if the conditions,
they're expecting a higher threat.
Correct. Right? We're going to send in 20, 30, 40 heavily armed Marines to let people know that, this is America. You don't want to mess with us here, even though it's in your country. That's
true. Like they did with the USS Cole after it got hit. I think they sent in a fast team.
Exactly. Because it was, in that port there of Aden, if I recall correctly. And we had to ensure that we could secure that ship until we could get it out of there. Exactly.
That's a very interesting profession. I'm sure it translates to a good civilian job when you get out, for sure.
Well, and I mean, having a secret, security clearance in your background is always a good thing.
So that's what they required for that base, or I thought they would have had you guys at top secret at least. I don't know.
No, it was secret because we weren't actually involved with handling of the assets. All those people had top secret, but for us, we had the personnel reliability program, or PRP program, to where the Marines were constantly being watched for any indication of substandard performance, substandard attitude. I mean, you couldn't
even drop a notch. You had to stay on top.
You had to stay on top, on the razor's edge for your 2-year tour there. Exactly.
I can imagine that a lot of those men went off to become very successful in other things in their life. I think you put that attention to detail is, as much as it sounds simple on one aspect. Oh, you're just guarding. Yeah. But all the other parts, when you're in it, when you're doing it, when you're maintaining a standard, when you're doing attention to detail, when you're maintaining security and you know what you're doing, I'm sure that raises your wire. So when you get out, you're like, people are looking down at their phones and you're looking at life a little differently.
I would agree with that 100%. Every Marine who was able to make it to the reunion, and even those that we're on contact with on social media, I mean, all of them have done well. They have gone on to do great things in their community. A few, did 20 years. A few did a little longer. But by and large, I'd say probably 85, low 90%, served their 4 to 6 years in the Marine. and then they went to school, or they became sheriffs, or they took over a family business, or they are in charge of airports somewhere, law enforcement, all areas of life.
A lot of Leos, a lot of law enforcement officers transitioning out of the Marines and transitioning out of the Navy and other forces, Coast Guard. So how did you end up deciding to go into education after the military?
Well, it was kind of a roundabout way, and education is kind of a loose term. I retired in 2004 from, I was the chief of logistics and plans for the J46 at the U.S. Pacific Command, Camp Smith, Hawaii. And I got out of the Corps and I moved to the Midwest area. And through some friends, I stood in for a woman who had to go on medical leave for 30 days. And I guess I didn't screw up enough, because my boss at the time said, hey, we'd like to keep you on board. And so I worked in the grants department, and, I basically do admin work. I know how to make things happen, how to get things done. And from that, I moved up to some supporting the chief of staff, supported her for about 5.5, 6 years. And now I support the chief operations officer for St. Paul Public Schools. So the chief operations officer has 8 departments that essentially encompass everything non-academic. So transportation, nutrition services, security, all of those kind of support functions. And so I'm kind of like her XO, her sergeant major, her adjutant, her gunny, cool.
That's awesome, though. But they can really appreciate all that Marine training and experience that you bring, because there's nothing else like it. There's nothing like it.
Zero. And it's interesting because, there are a fair amount of military. We have Vietnam veterans. We have Iraq War veterans. In fact, budget office, I think he ended up being the chief operations officer, and now he has his own school district up here in Minnesota. So we have a fair amount of military who continue to make contributions to the local community and to the nation.
I really like that. That's great to know who's behind helping the schools out, running everything, and just to know this being run at a military level is awesome.
Stuff happens. Stuff happens.
Well, it was excellent talking with you. And if if you have any other Marines from the base that want to share their stories, I would be glad to talk to them. We were all here around the same time, and put their name out there into the podcast world. And really, the podcast is about, where did you come from? How did you get there? It's a biography. And, people will be listening to these years from now, like, what was it like being on that base? Oh, I can listen to the guy that was there. We can't listen to George Washington's talk show.
Right.
We can't listen to anything else like that. Go ahead.
Well, and you're exactly right, Lynn. And this is a great effort that you have put together and are working. I'll send you John Keibel's name and contact information. These are the kinds of contributions that can go into what is ultimately going to be a Port Chicago Memorial National Park Visitor Center on the base. And the Concord Historical for helping to give people a wider context of life on the station.
That's what I am trying to do. And I think, I'll give you something. You just made me think of something. Our ship pulled into Hunters Point one time. It was a pretty big base. We were there for dry dock, getting repaired after a long Westpac or whatever. And the base was barren. It was empty. There's a couple of bases we pulled in that later became like the bases we see today that are full of a ghost town, right?
Yes.
And I looked around that base and, 22, 23 years old going, I wonder what it was like when this place was full of life, and that's, I was curious. And I think anybody that sees that or wants to know what was there before we all get sucked into the matrix, they're going to want to know what life was like before the internet, what it was like to be on watch with just a radio, right?
Exactly.
And I'll be glad to help them out if you want me to, help them get started. I'd love to see a Marine podcast that, even if you guys spearheaded that, just something fun to do once a week. Even Marines from all different types of units and detachments, people that you serve with, you might have had buddies that went on into, the wild front lines or the, amphib or different departments of the Marines or embassy guards that, were working in Switzerland. I don't think there is one in Switzerland, but something exotic like that, right?
Right.
That could be one heck of a library of these past experiences. And I have a helper / shipmate who was a big movie guy in Hollywood, and he loves this stuff, and he gives me a lot of support. It's Derek Grover, and he was a corpsman, and he also served with the Marines. He was there when the Beirut bombing happened.
Oh, wow. Sure.
He was there right after that. He had to go help look for search and rescue or recover more than anything. Mm-hmm. And so he's seen a lot of hairy things, and he's a great guest, but a good supporter. And what I'm trying to do, and I'm just sharing it on the podcast as I talk to you because it'll get other people to listen to, is to build either what I was going to call the ghost fleet or vet fleet and make a network out of it. Sure. And everybody can have their own thing. We'll just all be supporting each other, talking about each other's podcasts. Like, hey, and if you like what we get to say, check out the Marines at this podcast or check out the Army at this podcast. So that's kind of my goal,
Awesome.
One big umbrella.
Yeah, I tell you. And, I appreciate the support of the ships of Concord. As a part of that video, you probably recall that we actually got a ride on one of the AEs from San Francisco. And we, created a operations order and made it like we were going aboard ship to support an embassy somewhere. But we actually rode that ship from the port of San Francisco up Suisun Bay to Concord. And then I recall when some of the ships came back from Desert Storm, we were on the piers and we had a little honor guard there for you guys who, had been to sea for all those weeks. And we were standing there to honor you guys. So really appreciate your service in the Navy and aboard the ships of Concord.
Oh, same with you, sir. And I appreciate the podcast. And if you ever want to do more of these, let me know. We'll do some more.
All right. Sounds great.
Okay.
I'm walking alone, the streets are empty. The only thing I can see is my own silhouette. I'm getting stronger, step by step. The clock is ticking, but there's no time for regrets. I've been flying from town to town, from London to Taiwan. I've been all around the globe trying to protect your soul. We are heroes tonight. We will fly above the sky. We are heroes tonight. to Taiwan. I've been all around the globe trying to protect your soul.